Welcome to Surrender School. Session 4.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's so good to see you. All right. I'm going to dive right in, because I think this is a great chapter. The things that get in the way, and her premise is the three main things that get in the way is shame, fear, and vulnerability. I would have to agree with that. But let's go ahead and dive into the reading. All right. First thing I wanted to talk about was in the old edition, it's middle of page 35. And in the new edition, it's mid-page 48. And she says, I've never seen any evidence of how to working without talking about the things that get in the way. A little bit further on down, we don't want to be uncomfortable. We want a quick and dirty how-to list for happiness. We want a quick and dirty how-to list for abstinence, right? I'd love to skip over the hard stuff, but it just doesn't work. We don't change, we don't grow, and we don't move forward without the work. If we really want to live a joyful, connected, and meaningful life, we must talk about things that get in the way. And I think this is what we need to do for each other in program. This is, and I think that this is not the main, but one of the important things that sponsors do for sponsees is to help them figure out, work through what's getting in the way. And I will tell you that I have not found a way to do this work without becoming at times uncomfortable. I hate it, but it's true. I couldn't figure out a way to become abstinent without becoming uncomfortable. I couldn't find a way to stay abstinent without sometimes becoming uncomfortable. And I couldn't do the work of a spiritual awakening without sometimes becoming uncomfortable. And if I'm perfectly honest, my avoidance of discomfort in life was one of the major drivers of my disease, because food was really good at numbing me out. Next thing is top of page 36 in the old, and in the new, it's the bottom of page 49. If we want to live and love with our whole hearts, and if we want to engage with the world from a place of worthiness, we have to talk about the things that get in the way, especially shame, fear, and vulnerability. And I will tell you, those were major obstacles to my recovery. They are the major drivers of my defects, and my attempts to take care of myself around those obstacles always led me back to the food. Protecting myself from vulnerability, trying to seize control in order to make myself feel better about fear and shame. I mean, what can you say about shame? All I wanted to do was stuff it down so that I didn't have to feel it. All right. Next thing is just a little bit further down on the same page. Well, same page for the old. It's bottom of page 49, top of 50 for the new. In Jungian circles, shame is often referred to as the swampland of the soul. I love that. What I'm proposing is that we learn how to wade through it. And most important, We need to learn why constantly trying to maintain our footing on the shifting shore as we gaze across to the other side of the swamp, where our worthiness waits for us, is much harder work than actually trudging across the swamp. I think that's something that I had a lot of trouble. That's something that I had a lot of trouble finally doing. I couldn't figure out, it's that old adage about you can't learn to swim if you demand that one foot is always on the floor. It was that same way for my own recovery, is that as long as I kept demanding that I didn't need to change the way that I thought about things, then I couldn't let go enough to think differently in order to do differently in order to recover. There's that line in the big book about, we had to be willing to throw these lifelong conceptions out the window. And that was something I had to do. And particularly, I had to do it around the notion that I'm an addict. I needed to stop demanding that I really wasn't a compulsive overeater, that I really wasn't a food addict, and wade through the swamp of dealing with that, which for me was steps 1 through 9. I couldn't get there as long as I demanded that what program was really going to do was teach me how to not be an addict. That's not what program does for us. It doesn't teach us how to not be food addicts. It teaches us how to manage being a compulsive overeater and food addict. I think that was really important for my own recovery. Next thing I want to talk about is 2/3 of the way down on page 36, or in the new, it's mid-page 50. How to is a seductive shortcut. And I understand that. Why cross the swamp if I can just bypass it? Why is how to so alluring when truthfully, we already know how to, yet we're still standing in the same place, longing for more joy, connection, and meaning? I think this is why we focus so much on the food plans, and days of abstinence in our program. We still believe the lie that weight loss and control of the food is the solution to our addiction. And that is not the solution to our addiction. If it were, none of us would be here. We would all be fine. Okay, so the solution is a spiritual awakening, not being able to control our food. It's the spiritual awakening that allows us not to have to control our food. I love that. Bypassing. I have tried to bypass this disease so many times. Almost literally, I didn't get a gastric bypass, but I got a lap band, and it still didn't get me anywhere. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the top of page 37 in the old and the top of 51 in the new. I can know everything there is to know about eating healthy. But if it's one of those days when Ellen is struggling with a school project and Charlie's homesick from school and I'm trying to make a writing deadline and Homeland Security increased the threat level and our grass is dying and my jeans don't fit and the economy is tanking and the internet is down and we're out of poop bags for the dog, forget it. All I want to do is snuff out the sizzling anxiety with a pumpkin muffin, a bag of chips, and chocolate. If that doesn't sound like us, I don't know what does. Emotional discomfort drives my disease. Emotional discomfort is a main obstacle for recovery for me. I used to think that any kind of discomfort was, I used to read it or make it mean like there's some kind of emergency, like, oh my God, I'm uncomfortable, I have to do something. And I figured out it's very possible, and it was absolutely, quite frankly, necessary for me to be willing to just sit in the discomfort when I first got abstinent, because my body and brain were throwing an absolute fit, because I wasn't getting my effect anymore from my binge foods, from my alcoholic foods. And so I was just plain old physically, if not emotionally, very uncomfortable. And sometimes I could make it a little bit better with some of the things I did to cope. But sometimes I just pulled the covers over my head and just held on tight for a little bit. Fortunately, that doesn't last a super long time, but I had to be willing to do it. And for me, discomfort meant the end of the world. And I had to learn that it wasn't. Next thing is a little bit further down on page 37. I think it's like the fifth paragraph down on 37, and it's on the bottom of page 51, where she says, when I'm having one of those days that I just described, some of the anxiety is just a part of living. But there are days when most of my anxiety grows out of the expectations I put on myself. I thought about this one for a little bit, because the biggest anxiety provoking thing for me in program, in recovery, in abstinence, is the expectations I have around myself around abstinence, that I shouldn't have a food thought, that I shouldn't have this craving, that I should be able to eat one of these and stop, that I should be able to go to a buffet and make abstinent choices. There were all these expectations, and they created so much anxiety in me. And until I was willing to drop them, because quite frankly, I think that's step one, is dropping those expectations, because those expectations are that I'm not a food addict, because all the things that I just described are what it means to be a compulsive overeater. So I had to drop the expectation that recovery meant I wasn't that anymore, that I wouldn't have those experiences anymore. And that wasn't true. And once I was able to drop that, then when I had the experience, it was like, oh yeah, of course I'm having that. I'm a compulsive overeater. That's what happens for us. And it didn't cause me anxiety anymore. It made logical sense to me then. But it wasn't easy to do. It's not easy to drop those expectations. Culture lays on us that we should be able to do that. All right, next thing I want to point out is last paragraph on page 37 in the old book, and it's the bottom of page 51 and the top of page 52 in the new. As we discussed in the last chapter, when we struggle to believe in our worthiness, we hustle for it. The hustle for worthiness has its own soundtrack. It's the cacophony of shame tapes and gremlins, those message that fuel, never good enough. And, I think it's an excellent journaling exercise to take a look at what are your shame tapes? What are those shame things that come through for you? And I have two main ones. The first one is fat, stupid, and ugly. Fat, stupid, and ugly. It's this tape that just runs when I make a mistake. I don't do something perfectly. I say something stupid. It's that automatic reflex in me, fat, stupid, and ugly, fat, stupid, and ugly. Another one that is quieter, but I think more deadly for me, is that one that says, you don't deserve X, Y, and Z. You don't deserve that. And it's this little snarky voice that comes when I don't get something I was hoping for, or something doesn't pan out or turn out the way I had hoped it would. There's that little snarky voice that's, well, you didn't deserve it anyway. I hate that sucker. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is on, it's mid page 38 in the old book and at the bottom of page 52 in the new. She says, if we want to develop shame resilience, the ability to recognize shame and move through it while maintaining our worthiness and authenticity, then we have to talk about why shame happens. I think we have to also we have to really understand our own shame and the fact that we assume that what our shame is telling us is true, which I find it's really interesting. We assume it's true. This little shame crappy thing comes on in our head, these feelings of shame, and we assume that those are correct or right or true. And we really have to question where this kind of stuff came from. What purpose does it serve? To really know and be able to ask our higher power, is this really true? I ask my higher power that question a lot. Is this really true? Am I seeing this correctly? Because I get so distorted, and I spent 50 plus years of my life assuming that those shame tapes were actually saying something that was true about me. I didn't understand where they came from. I didn't understand what purpose they served. And when I really dug into steps 4 through 9, I started to see what that stuff was, where it came from, why I had it, what purpose it served, because it served a purpose. It kept me small. It kept me, it kept me from taking risks. It kept me safe. And it also kept me out of recovery. Next thing I want to talk about is that section there where it says shame resilience, a little bit further down on page 38 or on page 53 for the new edition. She says, here are the first 3 things that we need to know about shame. 1, we all have it. I think that's really important that we know that. At least I never knew that. I thought I was the only person that had this. Everybody else looked like they had their crap together. Number 2, we are all afraid to talk about shame. Number 3, the less we talk about shame, the more control it has over our lives. This is why I always ask my sponsees to tell me when they've had a slip or a relapse. I only have one requirement when I work with sponsees. I don't have any other ones. You don't have to write your food down. You don't have to make 3 calls a day. You don't have to call me every day at, 5:38 in the morning. You don't have to do any of that stuff. I only have one requirement. If you are having food problems, if you eat something off of, that's off of your abstinence list, if you dig into the food, please tell me. We have to let go of the shame. We have to let go. What we think because we decided to ask someone to sponsor us, that all of a sudden, all of that stuff's going to go away. I mean, it's not magic. It's just hard work. And so if you did slip, let's look at it. Let's take a look at it. Let's shine a nice bright light on it. See that it's nothing to be ashamed of, because you're just doing what food addicts and compulsive overeaters do. So let's look at it. It's not a reason to fire someone from sponsorship. It's a reason to draw closer. How can I support you more? What is it that you think we need to do right now? Let's take a look at this. Let's see where, what led up to this? How could we intervene next time so that maybe you don't get that far down the line? Otherwise, we lose a perfect opportunity to learn. All that happened was the sponsee made a mistake. Let's learn. Let's learn from it. That's what mistakes are for. So talking about it and taking the shame out of it, I think was very important for my ability to stay abstinent, was taking the shame out of it. Next, for the old book, it's the top of page 39, and for the new book, it's the bottom of page 53. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Shame keeps worthiness away by convincing us that owning our stories will lead to people thinking less of us. Sorry about that. Shame is all about fear. We're afraid that people won't like us if they know the truth about who we are. My shame about food and being a compulsive overeater, it morphed over the years. I became a compulsive overeater quite young, probably when I was about 6 or 7. And I started really gaining weight by age 8. And what that shame did is it like morphed and metastasized and started touching every part of my life, to where I wasn't even ashamed of eating so much anymore. I was just ashamed of being Linda. I mean, it was a horrible place to be, because there's nowhere I can go. I'm stuck in here. And releasing that shame was a powerfully healing process for me. And the steps are a great way to do it. There are other ways to do it, but the steps are a fantastic way to heal that and to let go of that. And I figured out that I wasn't inherently flawed and defective. How about that? I was just a compulsive overeater. It's just the way my body and brain are made. It was nothing more than that. And I made it mean everything about me. Next thing I want to talk about is further down, next paragraph on page 39 for the old book and the top of 54 for the new. She says, and while it feels as if shame hides in our darkest corners, it actually tends to lurk in all the familiar places, including appearance and body image, family, parenting, money and work, health, addiction, sex, aging, and religion. To feel shame is to be human. So I'm asking you, where does your shame reside? And I had to stop and think about that. And my shame primarily resides in my appearance and in my performance. I have to look perfect and I have to act perfect. That pretty much encompasses all of life, if you ask me. But those are the places that my shame really lived. If I made a mistake publicly, it was cool to make a mistake in private. That didn't matter. Make a mistake in front of people. Game over. I'm diving off into the alcoholic food. I'm gone. That was really interesting. I didn't recognize the performance one. I recognized the body one. I'd known that for a long time. The performance one didn't come up but over the last few years where I really recognized that as a place where a lot of shame hung on. Next thing is the next paragraph, the very next paragraph. Mid 54 in the new and mid 39 in the old. The stories of our struggles are difficult for everyone to own. And if we've worked hard to make sure everything looks just right on the outside, the stakes are high when it comes to truth telling. This is why shame loves perfectionists. It's so easy to keep us quiet. Again, another reason that I want sponsees to tell me if they've had a slip. Perfectionism will be the death of us in this program. If I have to do a food plan 100% perfectly, day in and day out for the rest of my life, I will fail. I will fail. I'm incapable of perfection. But if I let it be my teacher and then I learn and I grow, I can stay in recovery. But once I make everything riding on having to be perfect, I guarantee my failure in this program 100%. I am going to fail and make mistakes, guaranteed. And I have come through working the steps and really diving into recovery and my spirituality. I have come to the place where I'm not afraid to make mistakes anymore, which is a good thing because I make them all the time. Next part that I wanted to point out. Oh, I'm going to look at my little clock. Okay. The next thing I want to point out is in the old book, it's page 40, second paragraph. In the new book, it's mid-page 55. We're all capable of developing shame resilience. Shame resilience is the ability to recognize shame. Oh, I already did that one. I'm sorry. Next one. Oh, I made a mistake. See, wasn't I right? You cannot do this life without doing that. Okay. Next thing. It's the next paragraph. Shame needs 3 things to grow out of control in our lives: secrecy, silence, and judgment. Shame happens between people, and it heals between people. That's an important thing. Think step 5, right? Shame loses power when it's spoken. That's really powerful to me. Shame loses power when it's spoken. It's what step 5 is all about. But I also had to work on my character defects of lying and self-condemnation. Lying, dishonesty, if you want a softer word. Dishonesty and self-condemnation, because those 2 character defects kept me silent. They kept me quiet. They kept me ashamed. So I was going to lie to you and tell you everything was fine, or tell you that I didn't go out and eat X, Y, and Z because of my dishonesty and self-condemnation. And again, the steps are great at helping us work at that stuff. I wonder sometimes how much Dr. Brown's experience in program colors, how she writes. Cher and I were talking a little bit about this before we started today, because you can hear program through her writing fairly routinely. If you've been in program for any amount of time, you can see it. And so I think that's really cool because it does lend her stuff to program pretty easily that way. Next thing is bottom of page 40 or the bottom of page 55 and the top of page 56. After a decade of research, or 2 decades of research in the new edition, I found that men and women with high levels of shame resilience share these 4 elements. 1, they understand shame and recognize what messages and expectations trigger shame for them. 2, they practice critical awareness by reality checking the messages and expectations that tell us that being imperfect means being inadequate. Love that. Okay. Number 3, they reach out and share their stories with people they trust. And number 4, they speak shame. They use the word shame. They talk about how they're feeling and they ask for what they need. I don't really think there's much comment needed there. That is an excellent list. And this can be part of a meditation practice, even just thinking about these 4 things and asking your higher power, how can I put these things, how can I work these things into my life? Yeah, I don't think there's much to say about that. The next thing I wanted to share about is about halfway down in the old book on page 41, and it's at the bottom of 56 and the top of 57 in the new edition. What's the difference between shame and guilt? Guilt equals I did something bad, and shame equals I am bad. Shame is about who we are, and guilt is about our behaviors. And to me, this is a really interesting distinction. I skipped over guilt really early and went right to shame, even as a little kid. If I did something wrong, I was wrong. There was just such a sense of deep inadequacy and deep shame, and God forbid I get found out. I don't know why that occurred for me, but I do remember feeling those feelings at about 5 and 6. They started, that's interesting, because that's about when my compulsive overeating started. But I remember distinctly feeling those feelings as a really, really little kid. I don't know why. I don't think anybody told me to feel that way. I don't think, anybody trained me to feel that way. I just took that on, and I don't know why, but it ruled my life. A little bit further down in the same paragraph, guilt is just as powerful as shame, but its effect is often positive, while shame is destructive. When we see people apologize, make amends, or replace negative behaviors with more positive ones, guilt is often the motivator, not shame. In fact, in my research, I found that shame corrodes the part of us that believes we can change and do better. Isn't this why shame is such an obstacle to recovery? It prevented me from believing that I even could recover, that I even had that possibility inside of me. Because after all, I was inadequate and a failure. I mean, how could I possibly think I could recover? I didn't deserve to recover because I wasn't perfect. Next thing is just the next paragraph. Doesn't shame keep us in line? Shame is much more likely to lead to destructive and hurtful behaviors than it is to be the solution. Shame is related to violence, aggression, depression, addiction, eating disorders, and bullying. I wonder if that's the underlying mechanism when people tell me, like, I suggest, I don't require, I suggest that when people work with me and they're on a weight loss food plan, that they not get on the scale except for the first of every month. And people will tell me, well, if I don't get on the scale, I mean, I could gain weight, as if the act of getting on the scale was going to prevent you from eating. I don't know about you, but a lot of times the act of getting on the scale and seeing what the number was something that led me to a binge. So there's like this shame-driven belief that feeling bad is what keeps me in line, keeps me from eating 3 pizzas. I only eat 1 or something like that. That it just never held true for me in my life. And I would encourage you guys to really ask yourself, work with your higher power and your sponsor on what purpose is shame serving for you. Is it a taskmaster that keeps you going? Does it keep you from risking things? Does it keep you safe? What are you getting out of this? Is it a way that you try and control your own behavior? Mostly our own eating. Never worked for me anyway. It's the next paragraph. It's the top of page 42 in the old and the bottom of page 57 and the top of 58 for the new edition. Children who use more shame self-talk, I am bad, versus guilt self-talk, I did something bad, struggle mightily with issues of self-worth and self-loathing. Using shame to parent teaches children that they are not inherently worthy of love. And I would ask you in this, I would ask you, how do you talk to yourself? And I had to get really aware of that constant, critical, snarky, nasty voice inside of my head that was making all these declarations about myself because of some mistake or whatever. So I would really encourage you to take a look at that. And then there's another little thing that I want to talk about that's a little more sensitive. And I think some of our food programs, some of the food recovery programs are really based in shame. And they're very shaming. And they use shame as a way to try and keep people abstinent. They use fear and shame as a way to try and keep people abstinent. I mean, I did that myself, didn't work. Some people really respond to that. I don't know if it's a really good long-term way of doing it. I don't know. I could be wrong. But I do know that it didn't work for me. And trying to make me feel bad about my addiction and my eating behavior. Anyone else trying to do that would pale in comparison to what I was doing to myself anyway. So, and if that was really the road to my recovery for me, I would have been recovered long ago, because I was horribly shaming and I was terrified of what I was doing to myself and my body. And I was terrified that what other people thought of me, because I would balloon up and then I might lose 10, maybe 20 pounds, and then I would balloon back up. And there was all kinds of fear and shame around that. And so I didn't need any help, with anybody else telling me I was a piece of crap because I, had 3 too many green beans or whatever. It just didn't do anything for me. Let's see. Next thing I want to talk about is in the old edition, it's the very last paragraph on page 45. And in the new edition, it's in the top of page 63. Resilience is often a slow unfolding of understanding. What did that experience mean to me? What were the gremlins mumbling? Not only do we need to own our story and love ourselves in the process, we have to figure out the real story. We also have to learn how we protect ourselves from shame if we want to develop worthiness. This made me think about how shame distorts my perceptions of things so badly. I talked before about one of my, that shame lives in appearance and performance. And as long as I had a performance mindset, a perfectionist mindset, I couldn't protect myself from shame. And once I started, along with the help of my higher power, to change my mindset to more of a growth mindset, mistakes don't equal failure, mistakes equal growth. A growth-oriented mindset, that is really good protection for me, that worked for me against a lot of the shame I was having, particularly in program. That's just my 2 cents on that. But you really do, she's saying here, we really do have to figure out different ways to do that. I think some people do that spiritually. Some people do that by getting very structured in their program. Some people do that by being less structured in their program. But you do have to find the way to release and protect yourself from the shame if you're going to recover. I don't think shame and recovery don't go together. They're oxymorons. Next, a couple of paragraphs down. So it's like mid page 46 for the old and the bottom of page 63 for the new. According to Dr. Hartling, in order to deal with shame, some of us move away by withdrawing, hiding, silencing ourselves, and keeping secrets. Some of us move toward by seeking to appease and please, and some of us move against by trying to gain power over others, by being aggressive, and by using shame to fight shame, like sending really mean emails. I can see where I have used all 3 of these, and I think we probably all use all 3 of these. When I was younger, I think I used the second one more, trying to people please and appease people. Now that I'm older, I do more of the moving away, just moving away and hiding or running away or secrets. The next thing is a little bit further down, bottom of page 46 for the old and mid page 64 for the new. The easiest way to know shame is to cultivate an awareness of our physical shame symptoms. I thought this was a great way to bring awareness to this. She says it's important to know our personal symptoms so we can get deliberate in our response to shame. So what are your physical responses to shame? And I had to really sit down and think about this and put myself into a feeling of a shameful situation. And what I feel is I feel like this horrible tangle in the pit of my stomach. I feel like I want to run. And I And a lot of times, if it's really bad, I will feel tingling in my fingers and toes. And I think once we are able to bring that awareness to feel it, then we know that's what we're feeling. And then we can do a 10th step on it. Ask our higher power to remove it and help us with it. But we have to have that awareness. And I thought focusing on the physical was a great way to do that, because it really is an obnoxious feeling, or at least it is for me. A little bit, let's see, a little bit further down, bottom of page 64 for the new edition, and it's the top of page 47 for the old edition. If you want to kickstart your shame resilience and story claiming, start with these questions. I thought these were brilliant. Figuring out the answers can change your life. So I really encourage you to take the time to journal on these questions. Who do you become when you're backed into that shame corner? How do you protect yourself? Who do you call to work through the mean nasties or the crying hides or the people pleasing? So who's earned the right to hear your story, right? What is the most courageous thing you could do for yourself when you feel small and hurt? I really encourage you to take the time to journal on these questions. I think they're extremely powerful. I would suggest you do it with your sponsor. You both do it together and then read your answers together. And the last thing I want to talk about is the very last paragraph. We don't need love and belonging and story catching from everyone in our lives. This is important, but we need it from at least one person. If we have that one person or that small group of confidants, the best way to acknowledge these connections is to acknowledge our worthiness. If we're working toward relationships based in love, belonging, and story, we have to start in the same place. I am worthy. And I will say it again, and I've said it before, we really do need to develop a good God squad in this program. And your God squad could just be your sponsor, or it could be 5 people, or it could be 10 people, however many, but you do have to have one person that you can really be honest with in this program and really feel not judged and accepted by. And I think sometimes we get desperate in this program to find a sponsor, because sometimes it can be hard to find a sponsor. And we just take any old body that's willing to say yes. And that's okay for the time being as a temporary sponsor, but we really do need to be on the lookout for who we connect with and who we feel like we can trust and who we feel safe with. All right, that's all I've got for today.
See you next week.